Good morning. Welcome to the Backyard Professor Chess videos. In working through several Grandmaster games in order to help train our eyes on how to read the chessboard, how to make weak pieces strong, where to put our pieces, which pieces to play and when, this is invaluable training for us. This particular collection of games, I have 500 master games of chess edited by Tartakower and J. Dumont. It's an excellent series. The particular game I want to illustrate to you today is with Becker and Matheson. Becker is white. This was a game played in Carlsbad in 1929. Very interesting to see how these guys play this, because this shows us a masterful way to build up your center and to make it indestructible. It's a guaco piano, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, opening, where both players, you could have done, if you'd pushed the the bishop to here, it would have been a Ruy Lopez, but by popping the bishop on c4 and then c5, it's a guaco piano. Very interesting opening. This is an important pawn push because in the guaco piano we are going to emphasize the d4 and d5 squares. You can see that the fight for the center is becoming huge very quick. Pawn to queen 3, and sure enough, no sooner than I speak, he immediately pops up here to this center square. The d4 battle is on. Now you can see black's got this square covered 3 times. White has it covered twice. So the fight is for the center always, because that is the most important place of the board, right? Black will take the pawn. White will return the favor and take the pawn. Bishop goes back here to knight 3, and now the knight comes up to bishop 3. So the battle is raging. The bishop stays with his influence cutting through the center, just as surely as this bishop does. Each knight is popping in here to guard the center also. So it's going to be a terrific fight. Knight to bishop 3. Again, another argument right into the center. At this point, white castles. Black goes bishop, knight 5, pinning the knight to the queen. Now, what is happening here? White has built up a pretty formidable center, hasn't he? It's pretty good looking, isn't it? Truly is. Black is saying, you know, it's all just for looks, because I can attack your center. One way to attack the center is by pinning this knight. Why does that work? This is why the Grandmasters will always play one or other bishop pinning the knight. You see this in a lot of their games. The reason why is this knight is a defender of this pawn, right, on d4. He's also hitting e5. That could be a great outpost for this knight. By pinning the knight to the queen, black is not attacking the knight. He is, but that's not his point. His point is, now he can come after this square or this square. Isn't that interesting? That's kind of a little interesting subtlety with the Grandmaster games. So the bishop comes out to knight 5. The bishop comes up to king 3, again helping make his center absolutely indestructible. This is how you want to play the center. White has built up a huge center. He's got to defend it. Black castles in order to get his rooks into this game. Bishop drops down to knight 3. He's going to maintain the pressure against the f7 pawn to the king side, right? That's what you want to do. Rook grabs the open file, putting pressure on that open file. Again, the battle of the center. This is exactly what you want to do. Queen comes up to queen 3. Look at the way white is trying to demonstrate to black that my center is so strong you're never going to break it down. Look at the fortress in that center. That's impressive. When your opponent builds up the center like this, if you are playing an opponent who does this, your plan is already set in stone for you. The entire game revolves around you destroying that center. Otherwise, he's going to mow you over. So you don't have to move in a random fashion. You know, moves like this or this, those don't do a thing for you. That is a complete waste of time. This move does not address the center. That makes sense? Moves like this, if you were to push the A pawn, that does not address the issue. Here's where you got to work on, right? So you're not going to waste your moves and time. You're going to find ways to get to this. And that's going to make your game better. This is very important to understand this. Now let's see if I haven't lost my place. I probably have. Queen went to queen 3. Okay, bishop drops back to bishop, king, rook 4. Now, the pin is gone. So now, once again, not only by pulling the queen up does he support this and this square, but now the knight comes back into action, supporting this and this square, right? But the bishop maintains his development. See how that works? Okay, move 12, knight to queen 2. He brings his knight down, hitting this square and this square. Again, covering this pawn. The bishop's covering this pawn. The knight's covering this pawn. The queen is covering both those pawns. This is a seriously strong center, man. Black's going to have to start doing something to prove that, hey, your center is not as strong as you think it is. And this is one reason why he puts the knight here, because he's attacking the bishop. He's saying, I'm going to take out one of the defenders of your center. Now the knight pops up here to queen 5. Now it looks like the center is beginning to expand its power, right? So black is chipping away at the center of white. He takes the bishop. The pawn on the F takes the knight. Now this is important. He didn't retake this knight with his knight. He didn't retake it with his queen. He took it with his pawn. Because, for a number of reasons. Number one, it does give him the open file. You got to remember, black has an open file here too. It's open for black because his pawn is not in the way. It's not a complete free open file. It's not cleared, I should say. The other thing some notice is, well, white weakened himself because of those doubled pawns. That's not true. These pawns are not weak. They're very solid, and they're doing a magnificent job supporting the center. Look at what they're doing. They're giving added support to D5 and F5. This one is giving excellent support to D4 and F4. Those are a compact, solid unit at this point in time. You need to understand that. A morbid fear of doubled up pawns is not necessary. Right? So, he puts the knight to queen 5, the knight took the bishop, and the pawn took the knight to open up the file. I'm trying to keep my place in this book, it's difficult. This is the old style. It's not the algebraic equation. It's the old style equation. So the rook comes back to king bishop 1. Now he's going to directly challenge this file. Because you can see what white's doing. When your opponent puts the rook up, you know he's going to try to bring his whole other rook here to double up on that file. Notice what else they're doing. This is very instructive. He's putting his entire army into this. He is utilizing every single piece. This is one reason why his fortress in the center is so powerful. You see, white is in the lead in development. Black doesn't have his queen going. Black doesn't have his rook going. The bishop here is way out here in the middle of nowhere, and he's completely unguarded, so it's a loose bishop. You see that? That's a target for white. And his knight and bishop back here aren't doing a whole lot right. So you see, white, at this point, because we know how to read the chessboard, right? White really does have the advantage at this point. Watch how he takes advantage of this advantage. It's really instructive. Rook came to king bishop 1. Rook came up to bishop 2. Now the knight comes over here to king 2. He's going to challenge the knight on d5, of course. Knight comes up to king bishop 4. Rather than exchange the knights, notice the subtle shift. Notice where white is beginning to go. Right? You know, he didn't exchange. He's coming over to the king side. He's brought his rook up so that he can bring his rook to double over. White is gearing up. Because he has the center firmly in control, white's gearing up for a kingside attack. You can see that by the way he's playing, right? So, the bishop goes back to knight 5, and the queen rook comes over, and sure enough, it's doubled up. Now, white's beginning a kingside attack. Black's got to watch this. Queen comes over to bishop 1. Finally, now he's defending the bishop. The queen now has a defensive role. When you compare the two, the queen in her defensive role and the queen in her more centralized, certainly radiating more power and support for the fortress, you can see white has made every one of his pieces superior to black. Can't you? Pretty interesting how that works. Well, he's going to put the question to the bishop, right? The bishop, interestingly enough, pops back to queen 2. Now you can see black is entirely passive at this point, can't you? He's playing pure defense. He's gotten nothing going. He hasn't done the right plan. You can see this. White's plan, build up a center that is indestructible and then use that. Black's plan automatically has to be destroy that center. Black's not doing that, is he? He's not doing that at all. And it does cost him. Knight comes to bishop 4. I mean, is that something or what? Look at white's center here. That is quite a picture. Pawn comes to knight 3. Pawn goes to knight 4. Now, here comes the attack, right? And it's a very powerful attack. King goes to knight 2. The king actually steps up. That's very interesting, isn't it? And now, of course, white built up the center. Now he can advance. Look at the powerful phalanx of pure power coming at black. Notice how black has kind of come back home and caved in into a very passive defensive position. And white is spearheading this attack. Black hasn't done his job right. Pawn comes to queen 4, trying to put the block, as it were, stopping the free advance of his entire center, and he does put the question to the knight, so that's interesting. He's trying to relieve the pressure, and now the knight takes the bishop. And why not? Because that bishop was slicing through. Get rid of the bishop. The rook pawn takes the knight. So there's much less pressure against white's center here. Pawn now comes to king 4. Notice how these doubled pawns are playing such a powerful role in advancing the center thrust. Yeah, they're doubled pawns, but they've been moving forward. There's been a very powerful function here. Very interesting. So pawn, did I do that right? Pawn to king 4, yes. Move 23, pawn has to take the pawn. He has to at this point. He's got to break down this white center, and he's not doing a very good job. And now queen takes the pawn. Wow, what a buildup. Watch the kingside attack that occurs because white has put everything into proper order to carry on a very powerful kingside attack. And there's not a lot of protection at black's king right now. I've told you in the past, when the board tells you you can't kingside attack, then you can't. But when the board tells you you can, then you go right ahead and have a party on black's head, because white's going to start dancing on black's head right about now. Bishop goes to bishop 3. Queen comes down to king 3. He's setting this up. Knight to rook 5 is the obvious threat here. You can see that, can't you? If he plays a knight to rook 5, he's going to take open this kingside, and the king is going to be completely exposed. He's got double rooks here. He's got a rook capability coming over here. He's got queen movement here. Black's in trouble because he hasn't played this right. So queen comes to king 3, and the king dodges back down to rook 1. And now the knight goes to rook 5 anyway. Absolutely. This is a beautiful attack. Pawn takes the knight. It has to. Rook takes the pawn. Wow, look at him utilized his doubled rook's files on the file and get rid of white's useful rook. This is a very interesting demonstration. Rook takes the rook. Rook takes the rook, and now look at how this attack is coming on. This is brutal for black because he did not destroy white's center. This is the logical progression of a game when you have such a powerful center. You can mow your opponent over. Knight comes up here to queen 4, forking the queen. He's trying like crazy to get rid of the pressure. And the queen, of course, you saw that, I'm sure. The queen goes to rook 6. And now black's basically, for all intents and purposes, done. He does bring his queen forward. Now watch. The bishop gets rid of the knight. The centralized, powerful knight of black. The bishop goes ahead and takes care of that. And now the queen goes to knight 3. Very interesting what he does here. At this point, they show a variation. If the queen wouldn't have went to knight 3, for instance, if the bishop would have taken the bishop, then the queen would have come over here. That's a great response, isn't it? So, the only play black had was to pull the queen up to here. And now, the rook goes to here. And black resigned. That's a powerful game. That's a very, very interesting game because the entire theme of this game has been the indestructibility of white's center. And because he was able to focus so much power in the center, he could logically radiate that power over to the king's side. That's why it's so important. If you're facing an opponent that builds up that kind of a big center, you have to attack it. You already have your plan. You don't have to do any calculate. Well, I mean, you should calculate. But black did not attack white's center with near enough rigor or strength or energy. And because of that, he got mowed over. So that's another training game that helps us yet again see more and more chess strategy on how to improve our games. And that's the whole idea. That's what makes chess fun. Because like I'm fond of saying, knowledge in chess is power. And once you know how the different pieces move, once you know how to see what's going on a board, once you know how your opponent is strategizing to do something against you, then you can logically and with great power come up with a way to defeat your opponent. Black should have known when white doubled his rooks, he was coming on the king side, and he should have attacked more. You notice he never did get to use that rook, didn't you? Yeah. White used all of his army masterfully. It was only in the very late stages of the game that even black's queen came out and began to be used. But the queen and the rook, if you're going to leave a queen and a rook out of the game, I promise you won't be winning a lot of chess games. Let this game be that kind of an example for you again on the serious emphasis. You saw the pure power of how white, utilizing his entire army, was able to just simply mow black over, right? So, thanks for watching my chess videos, and happy checkmating, and happy chess learning. And I'll see you in the next video.